performance we have just seen is the finale of our December 2015 Hanukah concert. This took place in Manchester's oldest surviving synagogue, which has been the home of the Manchester Jewish Museum since 1984.
The event was promoted as a concert of klezmer music. We'll say more about this musical tradition and genre shortly. For now, though, we can say that klezmer refers to a musical genre originating in the Middle Ages in the predominantly Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazi Jewish communities of Eastern Europe. So, this gathering of klezmorim, the collective term for klezmer musicians, took place in a former synagogue as part of the celebrations for a Jewish holiday in 21st century Manchester, UK. On this stage are current and former members of the University of Manchester Klezmer Ensemble. They are playing alongside members of the local klezmer community, and if you look closely, you can see both of us performing. There are two intriguing aspects of this performance. First, almost without exception, the musicians involved are not affiliated with Jewish culture, identity, or faith, and yet many of the audience do see themselves as Jewish in some way. This raises a key question. In playing other people's music in this way, are we open to the charge of cultural appropriation? And, given the destruction of klezmer's original Eastern European context through anti-Semitism, pogroms, and genocide, are we guilty of indulging in cultural necrophilia in klezmer's afterlife?
Second, our initial suggestion for this event met with a cautious response from the Jewish Museum. We've tried klezmer before and there doesn't seem to be an audience for it. Despite such misgivings, the klezmer concert for Hanukah became an annual event until the pandemic. It usually attracted a full house. Thus the concert created, so it seems, a performance space for klezmer where none existed before. It seems noteworthy that this continuingly popular klezmer performance by non-Jews does not seem to be felt as appropriative by the largely Jewish, very loyal audience for whom klezmer is often an unfamiliar familiar. In this video, we report and reflect upon this klezmer ensemble performance context. We will foreground our pedagogical aspiration to develop appropriate methodology,
whilst remaining attentive to the risk and perception of cultural and specifically musical appropriation.
Klezmer is a genre of music with Jewish cultural origins, and it has the power to speak to members of the Jewish community in the present day. But its musical and cultural journey has been complex. We now briefly set out how we understand that complexity.
In the Old World, the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe where this music emerged, klezmer functioned as an integral part of wedding celebrations. Although the melodies, modality and ornaments of the music are partly shaped by the qualities of cantorial singing, and although it has aspects that can inspire reverie, the music was largely secular dance music, with particular types of dances functioning for different parts of the wedding celebrations. The word klezmer comes from the Hebrew Klezmer, meaning a vessel of song. It originally referred to a musician playing this wedding music. Klezmorim were semi-nomadic musicians who played the instruments available to them. Much of what they played was learned hourly. They needed to be able to play different styles of music with different types of musician. They might play popular tunes of the time alongside the kind of music we now know as klezmer. Klezmorim were versatile.
Oppression, pogrom and genocide all contributed to the destruction of the Jewish culture of the Old World. The survival of the music owes much to the late 19th century and early 20th century Jewish emigration, particularly to the US New World, and to the early recording industry. But during the 20th century, as Jewish immigrants settled and their children and then their grandchildren assimilated into the American melting pot, klezmer almost disappeared. In the 1970s and 80s, klezmer experienced a revival, which emerged partly through music higher education institutions in America, where musicians such as Hankus Netsky at the New England Conservatory trawled the archives and transcribed tunes recorded by the emigrant musicians in the New World. These precious resources were then used to teach new generations to play klezmer and form bands, to create new arrangements and add their own contributions to the repertoire, thus revitalising the music before it vanished from view. Many of the revivalist performers were young, radical and countercultural. They helped shape klezmer as the transnational genre we now know today. It is a music which is now rerouted globally, including in its original Eastern European home.
Our Klezmer Ensemble performance module is underpinned by an understanding of Klezmer's roots, historical development, and current dynamism, as we just discussed.
The module itself forms part of the undergraduate music degree programme. It involves a 2-hour weekly rehearsal cum seminar for the university ensemble. This is named after Michael Kahan, a local classically trained violinist and klezmer aficionado who was tragically killed in a random street attack.
Typically, about 12 undergraduate students form the ensemble each year. We welcome all instrument types, including second and third studies, and often encourage learning of new instruments.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed all the performance opportunities that we get with doing klezmer. So we've done 3 or 4 concerts this year. There's klezmer jam sessions every week and a few concerts in the university as well.
As a band, we work really well together.
We've really become quite close as an ensemble, which is really enjoyable because there's a good community spirit surrounding klezmer.
And we're able to communicate really well in performance. I think it just encouraged me to kind of loosen up a bit in my playing, to be a bit freer, to kind of step away from the notes a little bit.
Pre-pandemic, after about 6 months of klezmer learning, the students were assessed through a public on-site concert at the university, as developed by the students themselves.
An overall holistically formed individual mark is arrived at through consideration of the students' participation, preparation, programme note, and final performance.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2021 cohort of students mainly participated in this module virtually. There were a few opportunities for masked on-site teaching when the pandemic restrictions were temporarily eased.
This pandemic-affected cohort submitted a portfolio of work framed by reflection in, on, and for performance. Their curated video performances were developed for the Channukah party of the Muslim Jewish Forum, for the Klezmer Kabaret of KlezNorth, and for a music research forum event on intercultural musicking. In addition to these curated performances and reflection, the students submitted a supplementary programme note and took part in an individual virtual viva involving discussion and performance.
Whether taught on site or online, we aim to create an environment where klezmer is situated as a music with specific and complex origins and journeys, as a style of music and playing, and as a communal playing activity.
And that the module is situated within an academic setting where the students all have at least grade A on one instrument and have a strong understanding of classical music theory. It is also situated within the city of Manchester in the UK, which has a growing Jewish population, but for complicated reasons we don't have time to discuss here, it's not a city with a significant Yiddish-speaking community to support klezmer. Our klezmer activities also connect with klezmer nodes nationally and internationally. So how does this understanding of klezmer connect with our klezmer ensemble performance module and cultural appropriation?
Well, from the outset of the module, a decade ago, we wanted to recognise the complexity of klezmer. We see it as a developing phenomenon rather than as a thing to be owned or appropriated. We have also thought about the risk of cultural appropriation and, by extension, methodology which is appropriative. Instead, we aspire to promote cultural appreciation using appropriate methodology.
That seems to be a key distinction. Can you expand upon that?
Let us begin with cultural appropriation. Here, we find Karen Howard's recent discussion helpful. For her, cultural appropriation involves taking intellectual property, traditional knowledge and cultural expressions or artifacts from someone else's culture without permission. Such appropriation is harmful when the source community is a minority group that has been oppressed or exploited in other ways, or when the object of appropriation is particularly sensitive.
Mindful that along with most of our students, we don't have any Jewish affiliation, how does Howard's advice resonate with our klezmer ensemble approach?
These appropriative dangers are with us constantly in developing the module. We have a particular responsibility to respectfully set klezmer ensemble performance in context, acknowledging its origins and destruction in the old world and its subsequent journeys in the new world and beyond. We need to strive against trivialising, marginalising, essentialising, or otherwise working detrimentally with regard to klezmer and its Jewish roots. We also need to recognise its complexities, as outlined earlier.
So, if that's how we understand appropriative methodology, what about appropriate?
In my work as a teacher-educator in the area of TESOL, an enduring concern is with how to teach English in diverse contexts globally and do so in ways which are contextually sensitive. Adrian Holliday discusses this using the term appropriate methodology. We extend it to our klezmer teaching. We need to keep developing methodology which is appropriate for our klezmer ensemble performance context.
The subtitle of this video includes the term intercultural learning. What does this involve?
It means we have intercultural as well as musical objectives. Drawing on Christopher Small's term musicking, which emphasises music as an activity rather than as a thing, we view the module through the lens of intercultural musicking. This emphasis resonates with other verbing moves in recent years, language to languaging, knowledge to knowledging. Brian Street achieves a similar refocusing by speaking of culture as a verb.
That's a neat way of describing it, but how does this verbing idea and application of intercultural musicking as an approach affect our klezmer module?
Well, instead of seeing music or culture as things, we can think of doing music or doing culture. We can focus on being and becoming musical and cultural. Rather than thinking of cultures as large, relatively static entities, following Adrian Holliday, we focus on small cultures emerging when people, who themselves are culturally complex, come together to do something. For example, when musicians come together to play in a klezmer ensemble. We see our ensemble as an emergent small culture in which students are not only musicking, through it we hope they are also developing their transmusicality, their sense of the myriad musical possibilities and complexities arising in the cultural diversity they encounter. Our starting point for developing appropriate klezmer ensemble performance methodology lies with Schipper's Continuum Transmission Framework. This addresses cultural diversity in world music ensembles in the university context. Across the two iterations of his framework, Schipper has focused on performance, transmission and intercultural possibilities. It might be useful to start with the third of these.
Can you explain what's involved in the intercultural parts of our aspiringly appropriate methodology?
In positioning the module, we have had to make appropriate methodology decisions about quite a number of things. First, what's the balance between the goal of developing intercultural awareness through music and the goal of developing transmusicality through interaction with another culture? Second, where can we include the affective, behavioural and cognitive elements of experiential learning so highly valued in intercultural pedagogy? Third, to what extent is students' cultural schemata transformed radically rather than simply being added to? Fourth, should we promote an understanding of klezmer's complexity and dynamism rather than a particular understanding of it? Finally, rather than framing culture in large, often essentialised, largely static terms, can't we frame it in small, emergent, fluid and dynamic terms?
Now for the parts of Schipper's framework which shape our understanding of the performance and transmission context for the module.
Do you want to take us through the performance aspects first?
Yeah, so most obviously we have the performance context of the ensemble. As previously mentioned, we build in extracurricular connections to the klezmer playing community and Jewish community within the module. These connections seem to inspire passion for playing klezmer in the students.
And what about the approach to the performance itself?
I think we see this as a fine balance between the more ensemble roles and the more soloistic roles.
Why do you think this balance has emerged in an ensemble performance module?
I think it suits the music. Klezmer is a music built on a set of musical roles that have a mix of soloistic and ensemblistic leanings. Supporting, helping, accompanying, technical virtuosity and showpersonship are all part of playing in a klezmer ensemble. We are looking to create well-rounded, versatile musicians, like the old world klezmorim.
For me, the joy of playing klezmer is about the ensemble playing. I thought it was a much more enjoyable experience for both myself and the audience. I thought it was much freer, more relaxed, less focused on how well you played and more focused on what kind of emotion you conjure with the music.
And what about the transmission aspects then?
Well, from day one, we teach using a mixture of aural and notation-based transmission. As the students are all strong readers of notation, it allows us to put together the building blocks of the klezmer roles from the beginning. This technique means they're immersed in klezmer ensemble musicking early on.
Are there benefits of learning by ear, aside from klezmer being a largely oral tradition?
Yeah, I think so. I find the students interpret the music less rigidly, which is more in keeping with the tradition, but it also allows the students to be more attentive as ensemble members. Learning tunes in a call and response form from me or from recordings where there are subtle differences in every iteration of the tune gives a more elastic understanding of the music that is perhaps more appropriate.
It's good to have that balance between these two modalities, it seems.
Yeah, and it also links to a further transmission modality, which is about balancing analytical and holistic approaches with a leaning towards the latter, learning through a group arrangement process, for example, or playing for dancing.
Do you have an example of the holistic approach in action?
Yeah, so if we get a rough arrangement on its feet, we can build up the layers of klezmerness with each iteration, rather than giving them all the theory of good klezmer playing before letting them loose on the music. Though in some contexts we do opt for a more analytical model.
So again, we balance between these two. These holistic methods aren't very pandemic friendly, are they?
No, the pandemic has pushed us further towards the analytical model because of the inability to play in the same room together, but in some ways allowed us to give the students more agency as ensemble members.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so on Zoom, for example, I taught two groups two different parts of a tune at different times while you led the discussion. They then did a jigsaw exercise, teaching each other the parts they knew as a way to consolidate knowledge. It was actually quite efficient.
So the pandemic actually pushed us, I think, to develop some useful creative solutions.
Yeah, definitely, and it also pushed the students into more interesting areas for the performance itself, thinking about situated-ness of klezmer in a deeper way that stretched beyond the music itself. What lessons can we draw from this case of klezmer ensemble performance teaching and learning at Manchester? Can it help us understand the balance between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation?
The challenges and value of performing other people's music as part of a university ensemble experience in a context like ours at Manchester have been discussed widely and for many years. TESOL's edited collection on performing ethnomusicology is an obvious starting point, but its datedness and largely US orientation requires us to revisit such questions, I think. The answers we are cautiously working towards resonate with Michel Kichluk and Kelly Gross's goal of not imitation but interpretation, and with Waligórska's idea of cultural translation. But more than this, our work in progress is shaped heavily by the verbing move in intercultural discussion, in which a musical culture, such as klezmer, is seen not as monolithic, static, ancient even, but rather as complex, dynamic, multi-layered and multifaceted.
This doesn't mean the rootedness of the music is diminished. In fact, respect for the roots of the genre is a key part of our pedagogical approach. But respect is also required for its complex development journeys and the variation within the genre. And attention is necessarily given to the situated-ness of klezmer ensemble performance by our largely non-Jewish music students for often largely Jewish audiences in the local community otherwise unknown to the students.
Overall, we recognise that the methodological dimensions we have presented are specific to our particular context, to our klezmer performance ensemble in Manchester in 2021. But we hope they can also act as a point of reference for other music educators. In this spirit, we have shared our ongoing efforts to develop methodology appropriate for our Manchester context, as reframed somewhat by the pandemic.
These efforts capture our attempt to avoid appropriative ways of working. Instead, we try to embrace the potential intercultural learning, as well as the musical learning from ensemble performance for both performers and their audiences.